She was just the mechanic, until the general read her file. She was just the mechanic. At least, that's what everyone on Base 47 thought. Sergeant Alyssa Monroe, 27 years old, U.S. Air Force, stationed at Hollis Air Base, Nevada. Her days began before dawn, under the biting desert cold that made the steel of the hangar doors sweat with dew. By 5:30, she was already deep inside the belly of a C-130, hands covered in oil, hair tucked under her cap, humming an old country tune that no one ever heard completely. To most, she was invisible. The quiet type, competent, dependable, never late. But the base had its own rhythm and its own hierarchy. Mechanics didn't draw attention. They fixed the birds, fueled the engines, and faded into the background while others got the glory. But that winter, one act of silence and one file hidden for years would change everything. It was late December. The base was running night ops, something classified. Rumors whispered through the barracks, a covert drone mission over Eastern Europe, high-level brass visiting, and a general from the Pentagon arriving for inspection. Inside Hangar 12, Alyssa wiped grease from her fingers and glanced up as another tech shouted, "Monroe, power's down again." She nodded, climbed down from the C-130, and walked toward the power unit. Her movements were precise, efficient, the kind that come from years of knowing machines better than people. The hangar lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. In that silence, she caught her reflection in the window of the aircraft. Tired eyes, a faint scar along her jawline, the kind that told a story no one had ever asked about. She whispered to herself, "You're just the mechanic. That's all you need to be." But that night, as fate would have it, the general's convoy rolled in early. General Marcus Hensley, 4 stars, clean-cut, and known across the Pentagon for his steel-gray eyes and reputation for zero tolerance toward failure. When he stepped out of the black SUV, the entire hangar seemed to stiffen. The officers lined up, technicians straightened their uniforms. But Alyssa didn't move. She was still knee-deep in the wiring harness of an auxiliary power unit. "Sergeant Monroe," barked Captain Doyle, her immediate superior, a man with ambition sharp enough to cut glass. "Get up and salute the general." Alyssa froze for a second, then climbed out, wiping her hands on a rag before snapping a crisp salute. Her gloves were black with engine grease. It smeared faintly on her temple. The general looked at her for exactly 1 second, just a passing glance. Then he turned away. At least it seemed that way. But something about that glance lingered. The next morning, a thick frost covered the runway. Alyssa was back in the hangar, working quietly, when Captain Doyle's voice thundered. "Sergeant Monroe, report to command office 0800 sharp." Her stomach tightened. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her reports were clean, maintenance logs perfect. At exactly 0800, she walked into the command office, boots echoing on the cold floor. Inside, General Hensley sat behind the desk, a closed folder before him. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her, really looked. Finally he said, "You were in Kandahar, weren't you?" She blinked. "Yes, sir, Maintenance Unit 355th Squadron, 2019 to 2021. He tapped the folder. "Your file says something different." Pause. Then the room's air changed, colder, heavier. She saw the classified emblem stamped across the file, redacted, Special Ops Support. Her voice dropped. "Sir, that's not supposed to be—" "I know," Hensley interrupted, "but when a mechanic's name appears in a declassified op report that resulted in 12 soldiers surviving an ambush, it gets my attention." Her jaw tightened. "Sir, I only did my job." He leaned forward. "You dragged a wounded officer out under enemy fire. You disarmed an IED. You refused evacuation to stay with your team. Why the hell are you still turning wrenches on cargo planes?" Alyssa's hands trembled, but she clasped them tight behind her back. "Because, sir," she said softly, "some people get promoted for what they do. Others just try to forget it." The general said nothing, but for the first time, the silence felt like respect. By noon, the base was buzzing. Word travels fast in a closed environment. "Did you hear about the mechanic?" They say she saved a unit in Kandahar. No way, she's just a tech. Captain Doyle wasn't pleased. He'd been gunning for a commendation, hoping the general's visit would earn him a transfer. Now, some nobody mechanic was drawing attention. That evening, as Alyssa refueled a C-17 under the hard blue lights, Doyle approached. "You like attention, Monroe?" She didn't answer. "You could have told me about your little war story," he said, voice low and sharp. "Could have helped the unit's image." "Wasn't relevant, sir," she said. He leaned closer. "You think this makes you special? You're still just enlisted. Don't get ideas." Her eyes lifted, calm but cutting. "No, sir, I don't need ideas, I just do the work." He turned away, furious at her quiet defiance. 2 nights later, the base conducted a night maintenance drill. Engines roared, air thick with jet fuel, the hangar doors trembled from the force. Alyssa was assigned to a malfunctioning F-16 with a hydraulic leak. She was under the fuselage, flashlight in hand, when a sound cut through the engines. A metallic pop followed by a hissing roar. "Fuel line rupture," she shouted. "Shut it down, now!" But the crew chief misheard, and the turbine spun up, flame licking out the exhaust. She dove for the emergency cutoff, slamming her shoulder hard against the steel floor. Sparks burst behind her. A second later, the system shut down. The crew scrambled back, cursing and coughing from the fumes. When the smoke cleared, the general was there. He'd been inspecting night operations. Alyssa stood, chest heaving, uniform soaked in fuel. Hensley's eyes locked on her again. "You just saved a $20 million jet and 3 lives," he said. She shook her head. "I just did what I was trained to do." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, and that's what makes you dangerous to the wrong kind of men." Later that week, the general requested her file again, the real one. What he found went far deeper than expected. In Kandahar, she had reported a commanding officer, Major Trent Holloway, for falsifying mission logs and endangering soldiers for photo ops. The case had been buried. Holloway was quietly reassigned. Alyssa, on the other hand, was transferred out of special ops support and demoted. No one had ever reopened it. The general summoned Captain Doyle and several senior officers to the debriefing room. Alyssa was there too, standing quietly in the corner. Hensley dropped the file on the table. "Someone buried this. Care to explain?" Doyle's throat tightened. "Sir, I wasn't—" "I'm not asking if you were there," Hensley cut in. "I'm asking why a decorated combat technician was silenced and sidelined for telling the truth." No one spoke. He turned to Alyssa. "You ever regret it?" Her eyes stayed on the table. "Every night, but I'd do it again." He nodded once, then turned to the others. "That's courage, that's integrity, that's what this uniform used to mean." The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the faint rattle of a ceiling vent. Then the general said quietly, "Effective immediately, Sergeant Monroe's record is restored. Her commendation for valor is reinstated, and she's being promoted to Technical Sergeant." Captain Doyle's jaw fell open. Alyssa stood there, silent, stunned. Hensley extended a hand. "You remind me what right looks like, Sergeant. Don't ever stop." Weeks passed. The airbase returned to its rhythm, but something had changed. Men who used to walk past her now nodded in respect. Mechanics who once dismissed her now asked for advice. And Captain Doyle, reassigned to administrative duty, avoided her gaze entirely. But Alyssa didn't gloat, she worked just the same. Before dawn, after sunset, in the hangar, with the same grease-stained gloves. One evening, she sat alone outside the hangar, watching the sunset turn the desert gold. The general walked up quietly beside her. "You ever think of commissioning?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Not sure the Air Force is ready for that." He chuckled. The Air Force wasn't ready for a lot of people until they showed up anyway. A long pause followed. The sound of distant engines filled the air. Then he said softly, "You know, people will forget the file, the reports, the politics, but they'll remember how you made them feel, like honor still means something." She looked at him, then back at the runway. "I just want the next girl in the hangar to know she doesn't have to stay quiet. He nodded. She'll know, because of you. 3 months later, General Hensley was reassigned to a higher post. Before leaving, he called for one final assembly in the hangar. Hundreds stood at attention. The air buzzed with ceremony and pride. When he finished his speech, he turned toward Alyssa. Technical Sergeant Monroe, front and center. She stepped forward, crisp uniform, eyes steady. He handed her a plaque for exemplary service, integrity, and moral courage under fire. Applause thundered through the hangar. But what struck Alyssa wasn't the medal. It was the eyes of the young airman in the crowd, watching her the way she once watched others, with hope. The kind of hope that says, maybe doing the right thing still matters. That night, long after the ceremony, the hangar was quiet again. Alyssa stood alone by the C-130 she'd spent so many nights repairing. She ran a hand along its cold metal skin. "You and me, old bird," she whispered, still flying after everything. The wind moved through the open door, carrying the faint echo of applause that had faded hours ago. In the distance, lights from the runway blinked like tiny stars, steady, enduring. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. Not because of a promotion, not because her name was cleared, but because she knew she'd faced the system and hadn't broken. She whispered to herself, "You were just the mechanic, but that was never all you were." And somewhere deep inside the base, a young recruit watched her from afar, seeing not a technician, but a soldier who had turned quiet strength into history. True courage isn't in battle, but in standing for what's right, even when you stand alone. In a world that rewards silence, integrity is the loudest act of defiance.